Okay, Mr. Brenner, thank you. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you to my panelists that are coming up and all the panelists that have spoken before. It's lovely to be here at the third Africa Dyslexia Dialogue and to have these conversations that really contribute to what we all think about dyslexia. Our panel today is discussing creative problem solving and innovation, and we're exploring how dyslexic thinking patterns contribute to innovative ideas and solutions. And I have an amazing panel with me today, Mr. Tunji Andrews, wanting to see his video come on shortly, but he's a highly skilled economist, entrepreneur, is committed to financial inclusion, is an advocate on financial offerings for Africa's underserved informal sector. As an economist, he has over 10 years of experience in public and private sector roles across West Africa. He's a renowned media personality. He's anchored shows on the big screen and on radio. And in 2021, he put his words into action by creating Awabah, a one-stop microfinancial services hub for Africa's informal workforce. Welcome, Mr. Tunji Andrews. The one thing I haven't said here is that you're also a proud dyslexic. So I'm really glad that you're here to talk about how dyslexia has shaped your success and everything you've done. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Oluwole Oyeniran is the Enterprise Technology and Performance Leader and TMT Industry Leader for Deloitte in West Africa. He is responsible for enterprise solutions with a focus on systems implementation enabled by cloud engineering. He has over 23 years consulting experience and assists clients to understand and use technology solutions to solve business problems and transform ways of working. You look like I'm saying something that's not your profile, but it's everything about you. He is a certified Scrum Master. He's a seasoned Agile coach. He's a founding member of the Governing Council of the FinTech Association of Nigeria. We are honored to have you here with us, Mr. Oluwole Oyeniran. Thank you so much for joining us. Donna Stevenson, the female on our panel. We came from a panel with all women. Happy to be the one bringing in the men on the conversation. But hello, Donna Stevenson. It's great to have you here with us. Donna started her career as a nursery nurse and a primary school teacher. She developed a passion for supporting learners with dyslexia that led to many years at the British Dyslexia Association. And through those years, she worked with children and adults with dyslexia, working within education and workplaces to raise awareness and champion the dyslexia-friendly approach. Her passion and her career is now with supporting adults in the workplace through delivering training and as a workplace needs assessor. She is with Succeed with Dyslexia as the head of training and assessment, utilizing her years of experience to create a global service. Such an outstanding profile. Welcome, Donna Stevenson. And finally, last but also very much not the least, Dr. Chris Arnold, who holds the doctor title I'm trying to be given this morning. Thank you for joining us. He is a doctor of business, former board director of Saatchi & Saatchi in London, former board member of the Direct Marketing Association, former chair of both the DMA Agencies Council and the Creative Council. He's a founder of Creative Orchestra, an ethical brand marketing advertising agency, and his business consulting arm, the Garage Innovation Lab, was the first business to advertise for dyslexics to join its workforce. He's a co-founder of My Social Impact, specialist in social purpose. He has co-founded Diversity Lab, a global collective of high-achieving neurodiverse thinkers, mostly dyslexic thinkers, with their motto, using our ability to think different to make a difference in the world. I wish I could go through your profile, Dr. Arnold, but it's a whole page long of all your achievements. And most astounding of all, you have achieved this with dyslexia. So I'm really glad that you're here to talk with us as well. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Just to give some context to our conversation, I think, often everyone who thinks about dyslexia thinks about the difficulties with dyslexia and the gaps with dyslexia and all that we have to do to remediate dyslexia. Oh, there's difficulties with reading and there's challenges with writing and spelling and not remembering and all of these things. But the truth is that there's so many strengths that come with dyslexia. And that's really what the focus is, especially when we think about innovation and creative problem solving, which is what we really believe we need for the future of our workforce and for our communities. So we want to talk about that and talk about how do we identify those strengths? What are those dyslexic strengths? Are they real tangible strengths? Are they strengths that anyone can have? How do we enable them? How do we foster them? That's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to start with Dr. Chris Arnold because there's something you said that I found so interesting. You said, some of us are wired differently, see things differently, think differently. These are the people who change the world, the minds that see the other way and the way forward. So, what is this dyslexic thinking?
Well, I have to say, I totally believe that as well. We're actually doing a social impact of examination of the world, thanks to dyslexia, which is very interesting. So we're bringing the two together and saying, where would the world be without all those great thinkers, innovators, and people that have invented things from the telephone to the iPhone, and have created a big change. And those are the people that take us forward all the time. I always think if there was no dyslexics, we'd probably still be in caves, living a prehistoric lifestyle. I think that in a world where it encourages that kind of thinking, then we can benefit from that. But in a world that suppresses that kind of thinking, we just hold ourselves back. And I think always our challenge is working in the creative industries and around innovation and inventiveness and just general creativity is that we're often got this kind of, we're having to fight the brakes on what we're trying to do rather than being encouraged and supported. And I think that's one of our big challenges is if we flip the world around, then it would be a lot better if the dyslexics around the world, I mean, we'd be all much happier. And I think there's a big challenge there. But we are restricted by those who I find, I mean, I always use the term rather than dyslexic thinking, I use dimensional thinking because it's kind of got a broader range, but it does describe how we think, that we don't think in that two-dimensional way. It's like 3D chess. We think in a totally spatial way. And when I'm connecting ideas, it's sort of one there, one here, pull it down like some scene out of Matrix. And for those who don't have that 3D, it's a bit like someone who sees in black and white can't see in color. We who can see in color can understand that you can't see in color, but if you can't see in color, you can't understand how we see. I think that's one of our really big challenges in trying to educate and inform people, and which is what I think is great about today's conference.
Thank you so much. Wow, you said a lot of things there. Seeing in color and seeing in black and white and with the matrix. I mean, I'm struggling to understand myself, honestly. I can't really envision saying what you're saying. But are you saying that these skills cannot be learned because you're describing them as, something that you're born with, you have. But for everyone else who thinks maybe in black and white, do you think those dyslexic strengths and those skills can be learned, like design thinking?
Yes, to a degree, but no as well. I think the unique ability that we have is to do with our wiring. However, I think a lot of people go through, if you look at any of the Ken Robinson talks, he talks about how education systems globally compress us down to become very neurolinear in our thinking. Everything is like black and white, in and out, up and down, even down to boys and girls. We tend to work in a more polar culture, which has come from the Greeks, actually, rather than this idea of, the many shades in between. I think we can teach them to a degree. We actually at Diversity Lab launched a course earlier this year called Think Like a Dyslexic. A lot of people said, oh, that's a controversial title, but we chose that deliberately. What we found was that when we went to companies and said to CEOs who see dyslexia as a talent, you could make your workforce think better. We can turbocharge. We can lift them up a level. We can help them to start to see more dimensionally. They were really interested. But you get to HR is not a dimensional thinking department. Largely, it tends to be very two-dimensional, and it actually saw it as scary. One HR person said, "Why would we want to do that? We don't want a staff of chaotic people." And these prejudices all came out, these negative prejudices. But we believe that we can take people another level up. I don't believe you're going to turn someone into a Steve Jobs or Richard Branson, to be honest, creativity has been my life, but actually it's thanks to dyslexia that I actually been successful, not because of it. It hasn't been a problem for me, but because I work in the creative industries, it's an industry that embraces creativity, whereas finance, it's the very opposite. So I think you can, to a degree, teach people. And I think if we can teach people to take their thinking up a level, then actually they get to better understand how we think and appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Donna, I'm going to ask you to build on that for me because I know, succeeding with dyslexia in the workplace, there's something Dr. Arnold just said now about, some industries are more 2D than 3D, but dyslexics find themselves in all industries. So, what do you say about dyslexia in 2D, specifically industries? how do we identify those strengths in an environment that doesn't necessarily open itself to embracing them?
Thank you so much. It's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because I think, as Chris is saying, we seem to have a 3D and 2D kind of roles currently in our society. I suspect, though, that all rails should be 3D. So, Chris is talking about HR maybe classically not being so creative, but I think actually the best HR departments are creative in terms of how they get the best out of their workforce. And maybe we're in a transitional phase at the moment where roles that we would classically have associated with a 2D way of thinking, finance or HR, whatever it may be, I think maybe it's a reframe for those professions to realise the benefit of becoming 3D. Whilst we are in a climate though, and I think, it's wonderful to talk about gifts and talents and reframing dyslexia, isn't it? But I suspect all of us still engage with individuals who are really, really struggling around their differences because I don't think society has caught up, certainly at grassroots level. I know the high echelons of certain organisations may have these very intellectual discussions around benefits and so on. I can't wait till that filters down for those people who work in a factory or those people who work in a fast food franchise or wherever it might be. It's important that we understand that we're not quite there yet. And I think that there's also a socio-economic aspect to some of these discussions that we do have, Apple maybe, who are very committed to these types of issues, but maybe, other companies are not. And maybe, some of that is about raising awareness. So for those people who are in organisations and in roles where they feel very discriminated against and very misunderstood, I guess it's about understanding, very practically what your rights are as a worker and trying to be proud of yourself and understand that the gifts and talents that you bring, with you. And, it's about organisations like the work we do, working with the unemployed and so on to figure out how they can start to feel good about themselves and put together their profile that will appeal to organisations. So I think that, we're still quite a long way off, I think, the journey that we need to be. We've just been listening to our colleagues talking about education, and our education system isn't a good fit yet. So we've even got still young people coming through into the world of work who already feel misunderstood and disenfranchised. So I think, it's a case of trying to raise awareness, and conversations like this are a part of that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I mean, there's a lot that you've said there as well, the education system and creating the awareness. And in some ways, it's a lot of pressure also for individuals with dyslexia that have a lot to give if they feel that they also have to create the environment where they can thrive. So, Mr. Tunji Andrews, I'm going to go to you next because you have dyslexia as well. You've managed to build a thriving organization in what we've labeled in this conversation as a traditionally 2D industry in finance and in insurance. So, for you, what are those strengths that you think show up for you the most in the workplace? Is there really a dyslexic edge and some strengths that you believe are due to your dyslexia that have allowed you to thrive?
Thank you for having me, and great to see everyone on the panel, and everyone else that's been participating all day. So my team generally feels I'm a genius of sorts. I mean, especially when I call myself the ideas guy. So we've been able to, as a small company, the smallest player in a multi-billion dollar industry, being the company driving the largest level of innovation within the industry. I mean, and it's not like I tend to have read most of the things that I come up with. It's just like it makes sense to me, and I don't understand why it doesn't make sense to everybody else. So it's like so there's a challenge within the pension industry where it's around um, reconciliation. and basically payments being made and not, not properly reconciled. And my thinking was, why don't we validate payments before we make them? And everybody was like, okay, but we don't do that. And I'm like, well, we can, right? So we start to go around in circles and in circles, and we finally found it, and it's working today. And it's reduced the reconciliation issues by over 90%. And, when my team tends to look at me and, hear me, have another session, because I'm always having those sessions where I have this big idea. And I think they've gotten used to the fact that he's going to come up with something really out of the world, out of the pack with our industry. But to be honest, um, I like the way the doctor said, it's like seen in color. I just can see it. I don't understand why I see it. I just know I see it. I just don't get how I see it, but I do know I see it. So if you were to ask me how I do it, I don't know, but I just know that it's something that exists and I've come to embrace it.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, embracing it, I think, maybe something easier when you're in charge of the organization and you can set the tone. And I guess there's another question we'll get to about when you're not and when you're an employee, how do you let those strengths shine? But for now, I'm going to go to Mr. Oyeniran. I'm really excited to talk with you because, you work with so many organizations on technology and innovation. And I think when we talk about dyslexic strengths, we talk about how they apply to innovation. And there's a video that came out made by Dyslexia. We were talking about it earlier in the day that says, AI can aggregate, but dyslexia innovates. So at the end of the day, can technology really innovate? So my question for you is, when organizations are seeking innovation, what are they really looking for? And do you think that they truly find that with technology?
Okay, thank you for having me on this. And when innovation is sought, it's like a double-edged sword. Because from my experience, we as humans, typical standardly abled humans, tend to get in our own way all the time. We are extremely comfortable with the familiar and constantly reject the different, which is completely an antithesis to innovation. Because innovation requires us to embrace the uncomfortable and run with the different. So what that means is that to be truly innovative, organizations need, in quotes, visionaries, people who think differently from everybody else, because the same thinking produces the same results, which is not innovative. So it's always a challenge to facilitate a process where you trigger people to get out of their, comfort zone and start looking at things. It's really a struggle most times. And that's half of the work, to just get people to shift their mind. And it tends to be very, very uncomfortable. But that is what they actually need to be truly innovative. More often than not, what you see organizations do is recycle their old classic hits, repaint it and say, hey, this is innovation. No, it's not innovation. I'm happy that you mentioned artificial intelligence just now. Again, AI is going down a similar path in the sense that it has a lot of potential, but like anything in technology, it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you feed it the same patterns that you've always known and had, all that the AI would do is end up reconfirming your existing bias, validating your existing assumptions, and saying, oh, this is AI, so it must be right. No, it doesn't have to be. It just depends on the quality of information provided. And that tends to come from a limited thinking perspective. That has to change for true innovation to happen. As I'm sure as we speak more and talk about other people who have been truly innovative in this space, we'll see how that connects to this superpower called dyslexia, because that's how I want to describe it. It's truly an inherent, inbuilt ability to think differently, which is exactly what innovation requires.
Wow, thank you very much for that. Dr. Arnold has been nodding and nodding. I see he's really excited about what you said, but so because, he was saying earlier, and I mean, you might want to say that again, Dr. Arnold, about this thing about what goes in, garbage out, but who's putting the garbage in? Is it us or is it aliens? But that's something we'll come to. But really, that part that you're saying about is the thinking that needs to be different. That is the actual innovation. I guess in your work, where is the room for that innovative thinking? I'm sure when organizations engage you as Deloitte, they haven't been able to find the solution in-house, so how do you help them, or where do you see the room to help them introduce new thinking, even from within their organizations, to supplement whatever technology might be doing so that they can attain that innovation?
8 times out of 10, the solutions to their challenges are within the organization. They just don't have the open-mindedness to listen and to engage and embrace what is uncomfortable. It's as simple as that. There's a common joke about consultants like myself that, you hire a consultant to look at your watch and tell you the time. Now, it sounds, like an insult to consultants, but if you think about it, why couldn't you tell yourself the time? Because at the end of the day, when you look at your own watch, you see what you don't want to, and you create something different that is based on what you used to. So what consultants like us do is you introduce what is called objectivity and neutrality. We're not part of your business, so we have no challenge telling you the truth. And what tends to happen is that the voices within your business that you hadn't been listening to because they are too junior, they don't have the right training, they're very radical, we listen to them because they understand your business. We understand the places your business wants to go to, and we distill what they've said to tell you point blank, you have the answer, and here it is. And more often than not, that's the best fit solution for them, because the same solution doesn't work for different organizations at the same time with the same problem, because each person's or each company's or each business's context is different. And those who are within the business understand its context. So when they are saying go left, when everyone else is saying go right, and we also look at it and say, okay, go left, it makes sense if you remove bias, political constructs, if you remove inherent human biases and pride and whatever the case may be, the left makes sense. Even though right is almost like good money after bad, because I've spent so much in this, I can't leave it now. But left is a new direction that's going to be much, much better. We can tell you, listen, we've spoken to your guys, we looked at the market, left makes sense. So the reason why they hire us is because we bring that objectivity. How do we not get them to listen? We engage at the very top, at the board level. The people who have a long-term stake in the business. Executives come and go, but the board remains. We engage at the board level to say, listen, do you want this business to be successful or not? Yes or no? If you do, then you have to listen to some hard truths. Now, let me now give you the final clincher. The number one way, especially in this market, that you can convince anyone of an action is to use what is called benchmarking. You find who they will compare themselves to internationally or locally, who have done something similar to what we're recommending, the outcomes they have achieved, and we'll tell them, we know you admire these guys. They did this similar thing, not exactly the same, but similar thing, and they got this result. That always works. And it's a thing that can also be instructive in how we deal with the challenge of adopting formally the power of dyslexia. If we're able to show, locally a fantastic case study as to great products, ideas, and solutions created with that mindset, everyone's going to want a dyslexic in their organization, heading their strategy, or heading their innovation, or heading their user experience design, or heading their customer service. All those areas that require empathy, that require thinking differently, that require being able to navigate abstracts. All of those things, once you're able to have that kind of a case study, and that's what tends to work, especially in this market.
Fantastic. Thank you. So what I found interesting there was most of what you talked about were what I call them, the softer barriers that the organization needs to remove. It's about that openness, the willingness to listen, the willingness to go in a different direction, and that a lot of things are engineered to create a structure that forces those to happen. But Dr. Arnold, you've been nodding and smiling a lot. I really want to hear what you're thinking.
Well, I think AI is a very interesting one because it is changing the way everyone's thinking. But unfortunately, a lot of people aren't that well informed about it. And there's a lot of myths going around. We referred earlier to that one about AI and dyslexia. And it's interesting. There's an artist called Eleanor Crook who was working with Midjourney, which is a very visual aspect. And there's an artist they were working together to see how AI complemented what she did. And the final conclusion was it's a great tool. You know, it's quite interesting. It shows you some alternatives, he said, but there's no I in AI. You know, it doesn't have that human element that takes things higher. And it's the same as people say in music. There's no ear in AI. It just gives you the same. I think you're dead right, actually. You say about it takes everything that's out there and it just then recomposes it. And you just get a bit more of the same. You're not actually getting leaps. So AI may take a step forward, but it doesn't take leaps and bounds. And I think what is very characteristic of dyslexics, especially those like me, also ADHD, which is why I speak so fast, is that we take enormous leaps. We have we don't have a fear factor. We have a belief in the confidence of our ideas. We will jump over the cavern, believing we will land on the other side. Whereas AI doesn't have that ability. It doesn't have the human idea to take leaps. It doesn't have a human idea to actually do risks and push forward. So I think that's one thing that's still unique for us is that we do have that kind of belief and we can see opportunities, we can see outcomes that there's no way AI will ever see. So I was saying earlier on that, you know, I think very neuralinear people are hoping that we're going to be replaced by AI, but we're hoping that neuralinear people are going to be replaced by AI. We'll see who wins at the end.
Thank you for that. Who's going to win in the end? No one really knows. We're just hoping, like I said, like you said, you know, that we can find a way for technology to enhance and enable the things that we need to take us forward. If that is, you know, dyslexic thinking or dyslexic thinking skills or empathy, how do we get technology to enhance those? You know, what do we actually put in it to help us move forward? Mr. Andrews, I want to ask you about, again, putting those into an organization. So sometimes people think that when these strengths are there, that the other strengths required for implementation might suffer because that's sometimes where dyslexic challenges show up. So for you, in taking those ideas, you know, you're the ideas guy and that's one of your strengths, you know, how do you then get the implementation to happen with whatever challenges come with your dyslexia?
I think it's the power of synergy. One of the things that I think works the best for me is in understanding my strengths and my weaknesses. I understood very early that I might have great ideas, but I also understood very quickly that I wasn't able to think in structure in terms of this is line item 1, line item 2. I might know how to basically what the whole overall idea is, but how to make it go from 1 to 2 to 3 was always a challenge. So I always made sure I supplemented or supported myself with people who thought that way. Also, I think I'm not entirely sure if this is dyslexic in nature, but I think I tend to have strong empathy and always tend to want to understand why someone is not as efficient in their area, and it doesn't tend to help my leadership style. So I always tend to have a strong iron fist as my number 2 wherever I've ever worked. You know, the first thing I get is the strong number 2 who is the bulldozer, the person who breaks everything. I'm the always, oh, okay, let's work through it. Okay, we'll find a way to make it happen. So I've always found that it's very important that once you have a dyslexic person in an organization, you want to build structure around the person to be able to help the person's strengths become very useful to the organization. And I wanted to speak to earlier on when you were talking about if the person is not in the leadership and the person works for the organization. What I also found that was very useful was to, because I always had people who were above me who were great in many things, but I always found out that I think I had better ideas than they had. And quickly, I also realized that, having somebody who is a subordinate, being smarter than you was always a threat to a lot of Nigerian bosses. So I tend to always just, found ways to give them all the ideas and allow them be the ones to, make the best use of those ideas. They never knew how to, think through it. So they always call me, okay, Tunji, come and explain how we can do this. And I would go, oh, this is a fantastic idea. And I'll basically work through it. But I think what I've learned in the whole context is that we are all a community, dyslexic and non-dyslexic people, and it's that correct synergy in any organization that makes it really thrive. So in my organization, I've found the dyslexic people have, so they're in my growth team. So I have a growth team. We're the ones that do the thinking. I know there's this guy in my team, if we wanted to name something or we wanted to give it a new design, he was the guy. And he doesn't work with communications, he doesn't work with design, he's in business development, but he's that guy. Just have him sit down and we're thinking, throwing ideas, he's not saying anything. And in like maybe 10, 20 minutes, he just comes up with this idea that blows everybody away. So we know him for that. So we always use him. Like anytime we're trying to think, okay, Michael needs to be in the room. So the idea really is that synergy and knowing that everybody needs to play their part in the team. This guys are the ideas people, these are the structure people, but that thing that brings them together is what really makes your organization, extraordinary.
Oh, thank you so much for that. It's the structure, it's the enabling environment, it's seeing where the synergy is. And I guess, that's also a strength that you've brought now at the leadership position. Again, coming back to the role of the leaders. Donna, what do you think about that? I mean, you work with training for organizations. How do you get organizations to take the training, to get educated about how to identify those strengths in the workplace and put them to good use?
I think for a lot of organizations, and I'm going to keep it real here, it's fear of being, accused of discrimination and so on. I think, unfortunately, not all organizations are at this place that we're talking about this morning around appreciating, people's strengths and talents and so on. Some organizations, and quite a few of them actually, are quite scared that they are going to, be accused of discriminating against individuals through legislation and so on. So they will reach out in order to ensure that they are belt and braces around, the legislation, for example, here in the UK. Happily, what happens then is that they have a light bulb moment and realise, oh, actually, this isn't just about protecting ourselves. This is about getting the best out of individuals. And this makes perfect business sense because we want people to stay within our organisation who are super talented. We don't want people to leave us. We want people who are here firing on all cylinders and really playing to their strengths. So happily, sometimes it starts with almost a place of fear from the organisation, but it develops then into that realisation that this just makes perfect people sense and perfect business sense as well. And that's what then becomes really exciting because then you see the organisation evolve, I think. And I think, a lot of the conversations that we're having here about valuing difference and celebrating difference and people themselves, daring to reveal their differences and being confident enough to do that. Hopefully we'll have synergy in organisations where all those things will come together. The person themselves will want to share their authentic selves. The organisation is ready to receive that and actually knows how to get the best out of them as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. For an environment where there's legislation, I think it's helpful, like you said, to force everyone to start something to protect themselves. But But in an environment like this, where we don't have legislation that applies, what would you recommend as the best way to broach that conversation? For us, we've struggled, I mean, to get a lot of organizations on board to train, to get educated about, dyslexia, to support employees. What would you recommend?
I think, it's a great question. I suppose we're very lucky in certain parts of the world. We do have legislation like that, which kind of pushes through sometimes organizations and commitments where there may be some reticence. I think for cultures where there maybe isn't that, it comes from people power, really. And it comes from this idea, and I jotted it down, this benchmarking, I guess, isn't it? It's comparing yourself to other societies, other organizations where, they are getting the best out of their workforce, and think, hey, maybe we're not doing that. So I think there is an element of comparison. I think it is about having awareness times like this where these conversations can happen, and then organizations decide that, yeah, this is good business sense, it's good people sense. As we think about 21st century working practices and we are thinking about AI and technology, yeah, workforces, organizations need to bring their A game now in order to compete and to be very attractive as employers as well. There's a statistic I heard a little while ago, and this is across the world, that by the year 2030, 57% of our workforce will be made up of Gen Y and Gen Z. So these are the younger individuals coming through, and this is across the world. So it's only 7 years' time. And then I saw another part of that conversation saying around 50% of Gen Y and Gen Z identify as neurodivergent. So as we try to future-proof our organisations, this is really important as well if you want to attract the best of the best. So I think it comes essentially from people power as well.
I think, just recognizing that most of the people that are going to make up the workforce in a few years identify as neurodivergent is enough reason to start to position
yourself. Yes, definitely.
Well, I'm going to ask you again about sort of bringing those skills to play. I know you talked about a lot of the answers organizations seek is from within them. But what do you think about the idea of sort of learning those ideas? I'm asking you before I ask Dr. Arnold the same question, because I know Diversity Lab does this. But, if you had an organization in our context that worked primarily with neurodivergent thinkers, how do you think organizations here would receive bringing those on as consultants in addition to technology consulting?
Okay, I'm going to be as blunt as humanly possible here. The bias runs deep. And I believe that language has been weaponized against the neurodivergent pattern of dyslexia. Words like disability, words like learning difficulty, these are all misnomers, in my own opinion. The starting point is to change the language and the way it is communicated and the way it is expressed to create that acceptance. The next level of that is to promote diversity programs, like at Deloitte. For example, we have a global diversity program where we explicitly engage with recruitment agencies for neurodivergent individuals that we deliberately and consciously bring into our teams. Because as a global firm, we recognize the value that skill set brings to what consulting is. Thinking differently, creating solutions that no one else has seen. That is an explicit action driven off on the back of inclusion and diversity. Diversity fundamentally strengthens, and that is something we do deliberately. Another architect of this creation of diversity is agile practice. Agile practice requires you to assemble differently able people into teams to solve problems. That needs the most diverse base of people you can imagine orchestrating solutions in this team. So once those type of basic blocks are in place, then having an organization that now pushes more and more specifically identified individuals with this gift, that's the word I would use to describe dyslexia, would see a huge amount of adoption. But while the current mindset remains and the language is expressed the same way, why will I hire, in quotes, a disabled person if I don't have to, in quotes? But when the realization comes that dyslexics are not disabled, the fact that a fish or fish have orchestrated the landscape does not mean that birds are ill-equipped. They might not be able to swim as fast, but boy, can they fly. And that's the world that we are in. The fish, in quotes, normal people like us, in quotes, as they say, have to recognize that the superpowered people, dyslexics, are like the birds that can see higher, further, fly faster, and do amazing things that we, who can only swim, cannot do. But we, because we call the birds disabled for some strange reason, I don't know why that is, are intrinsically opposed to including them because of we don't want liability. But when the language changes to maybe alternatively abled or cognitively enhanced, whatever what language you want to use, they now becomes an attraction to say, I want people like that on my team. But in the absence of that, it's going to be very tough. Let me be very blunt to push that, especially in this market that also has a, in quotes, follow culture. Who else has done it? No one. Okay, well, we'll wait until somebody.
Can I add to that?
Please go ahead.
One thing we found is we've been tapping into psychometric profiling. So a lot of companies do that, especially in their team building. So when they're team building, they're looking, people have got big, high vision, they see a bigger picture. Those who are very good at process, those are very good at motive aspects, and those are good leaders. And we've basically identified where certain skills of things, especially dyslexia, fits into that. So if you start the conversation, you flip it around and say, what you're looking for in this team is somebody who has this ability, this ability, this ability. Oh, by coincidence, that happens to be Johnny over there who's dyslexic. And by starting from that way around, we found there's been a greater acceptance. I think you're dead right. I've just written an article. I put a link in the chat yesterday about changing the language. It starts in schools. We condemn our children from day one with things like learning difficulties, special needs. I mean, I was classified as hyperactive at school, which just sounded like a superpower. Everyone was like, wow, Chris has got hyperactivity. Lucky him. My son, who's 7, has just been given ADHD, attention deficit, a hyperactive disorder. I mean, we condemn our children. Of course, that language seeps through into employers. And so not surprising, as you said, they say, why would I want to hire somebody who's disabled, who's disorganized? They see all the bad stuff. They don't see the good stuff. And I think, in many ways, the education system has a lot to blame for that.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, really, honestly, really true, especially here. I think, even in our experience, we do see that even those who are open to the idea of dyslexic strengths and, the real dyslexic edge, sometimes that narrative goes back to the remediation. It goes back to the deficit because we're trying to force that baseline that Donna spoke about earlier, take the place of the legislation that allows you to start from a point of fear. So people think, sometimes it's better to just stick with the narrative that says your kids are going to fail and not do badly if you don't identify who's dyslexic now. And then hope they see it from there. But actually, that is not also the way to bring out the strengths of dyslexia. With Diversity Lab, how do you see organizations embracing the value that you bring? How did you introduce the idea of sort of loaning neurodivergent thinking?
Well, you've got to start at the top. I mean, at CEO level, our first target is those CEOs who are actually dyslexic because they get it straight away. Baines did a report, management consultant, that said that 76% or something of, always dubious of data that has 70% of anything, but 76% of senior executives, CEO, C-suite level, felt that their middle management were not innovative, were not thinkers, were not using their brain. That's not surprising that also most dyslexics leave companies at middle management level. They tend to leave because it's so linear, and they go off and start their own businesses, which is one reason that's been identified why dyslexics are very entrepreneurial. And so you have to have that conversation at very high up. Now, CEOs, they want talent. They want to embrace that talent. They need that talent. They need to be agile. They need to be competitive. And they benchmark themselves, as you said, against other companies. They need those talents. HR doesn't see it that way. Not at all. Unless you've got someone who's head of talent recruitment, and then they tend to be more open-minded to it. So we tend to talk at CEO level and look at basically we look at the company impact, and say, look, what can this do and how can it benefit you? And I worked with an insurance company a while ago who created an innovation department. They scrapped after 2 years. And I explained to the guy, he just put the complete wrong bunch of people in there. They're all techies. What he wasn't getting was the people who were thinking, innovatively about engaging the customer and how to think more dimensionally. And when I explained something to him, he went, wow, I wish you told us that 2 years ago. Too late.
He finally got it. I mean, in the chat box now, someone's just talked about how in the US, no matter how you view dyslexia, the education system can only get government funding if dyslexia is classified as a disability. And it comes back to the language, what we're talking about, that language thing. Even with HR, as you've just said, Dr. Arnold, that idea of what are the KPIs, what's the language behind the KPIs that HR also has to seek talent and not necessarily just to, recruit and keep to some budgets. Mr. Andrews, what do you think about managing employees who are dyslexic? They have these strengths. We can identify them, whether through psychometric testing or through working with, those in other cadres in the organization and communicating them to the leaders. But when they are identified, how do you think is the best way to nurture those strengths? I think you might be muted. Are you able to unmute yourself, Tunji Andrews? Oh, I think he's experiencing some.
Yes, I can. So could you say the question again? My earpiece just went a bit muddled up there. Sorry.
It's fine. So, we're talking about managing dyslexia in employees. And, earlier you talked about putting in the right structure and identifying talents that, where they're best applied. But practically, especially for general managers who may not have an understanding of dyslexia, what is the best way to create an environment where strengths of dyslexia can thrive?
I think that's why training is important. I don't think it's something that non-dyslexic people will notice if they had no training. I'm not sure it is something they would even come to appreciate if they had no training whatsoever. Because the sincere truth is that someone who is dyslexic and in an organization, especially the way most organizations are structured. And I'm talking to first, let's go to the traditional organizations, the brick and mortar. I'm not even talking about the techies and all the rest, the brick and mortar businesses. There is a certain profile that is required for you to climb the ladder. And that profile is hard work, structure, diligence, paperwork, and all those things. Now, it's not necessarily the things that most dyslexic people would thrive in. They would most likely be good at it, but not exceptional at, paper pushing and things like that. But it's in knowing that they are able to do certain things that the people who have that particular skill would never be able to do. But if you can't identify it, then there's no way that the organization will be able to take advantage of the strengths it has in dyslexic people. So for my team, I'll say this for my team specifically. So there's been many areas where I'd had to, step in. And it's not just in areas of dyslexia. I'm talking about in areas of general inclusivity and in areas of general showing of empathy. It's me being able to step in and insist that, no, we are an organization that will not let things like this slip or slide. And I generally feel that if you do not have it in your culture, you will miss those strengths. And like a speaker said earlier, that, you put the wrong people in a department and in an innovation department, you're always going to get wrong things. They're only going to be trying to make the buttons quicker, the page to move from one page to another, make it faster. They're not going to think outside the box to be able to make something really innovative. So I think that's why training for organizations is super, super useful. But the lucky thing for my organization is I happen to be the one that is dyslexic. So it helps. It really helps. So I'm able to see it from that perspective. And a lot of the times when I'm able to move certain things in certain directions, people don't get it initially. After a while, everybody now sees, oh, so there was a person that we moved from a particular role to another. And I kept insisting that this guy needs to move to this role. Everybody didn't get it. He got it, thankfully. But then in his new role, he has been exceptional, and it felt like we were pretty much putting a bird into water to swim, in his previous role. While in this new role, he's flying and he's literally almost taking over my job, really. But it's really about knowing how to take advantage. But again, like I will go back to the conversation. If the organization isn't trained, there's nothing that you can basically expect from them. If the leadership doesn't know how to take advantage, you're pretty much wasting your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And there's something also that Amole, you put in here that is a crazy thought, but athletes get funded because of exceptional abilities in a specific narrow area. And maybe that's another mind shift that we need, rather than, we're not getting funding unless it's a disability. Is there a way that we can make the argument for, build a narrative for, and sort of drive support for the strengths that we need to create what we want, in the future? So thank you very much, everyone. I know we're a few minutes to one and we're fast running out of time. Thank you so much for this conversation. I've learned so much from it. I think the most exciting thing that I started with was that idea about technology sort of taking over from creative thinking and creative thinkers, and really seeing that at the end of the day, it's still the person, it's still the people, it's still the brain work that is important, and technology is an enabler at best at those. And the garbage in is still someone who puts the garbage in to get out what you want. So thank you so much for that. And also that the environment matters, that the openness and the nimbleness matters, that giving room for strengths to work as synergy is also very important. And that training is everything. I mean, without knowledge, where are we really going? So thank you so very much for all of your contributions today. Just before we wrap up, is there anything you'd like to add? Anything we didn't touch on that you'd like to add before we go?
Can I add one thing, actually? I think in UK especially, the broader term of neurodiversity has come about, and that embraces things like autism and many other things. And in many ways, it was a good idea at the time, but it's become actually more confusing to employers. Much more so. And now they bunch all of us all together in one bunch. And so you get almost the worst of it all, actually. And a lot of us are now moving away from that term neurodiversity, because although it's good to talk about, diversities of thinking, it has become a bit of a negative badge for a lot of us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's true. I think, in the start, when we're beginning to understand something, we lump it all together. But as we gain more understanding, we should separate it to give room for it to thrive. And unless we do that, we're always going to see it as what it's not. I completely agree with that. Mr. Oyeniran, anything you'd like to add, Wale?
Yeah, I'll just want to say that this is a battle that we need to win, because especially as a nation, not just from a global, I'm talking about, I'm very, very, very selfish. I'm thinking about Nigeria. We need every advantage we can get. And a huge talent pool is being neglected as a consequence of a radical lack of understanding of the abilities of this pool. And talent is, if anything, talent is a strength of this country. And we have huge pools of talent that can do amazing things even on the global stage that we simply, as a nation, are not even thinking about. So, I mean, when I first had the conversation with you, Lady, I was like, my mind was blown as to how much we are missing, how much we are losing, how much of radical transformation, nation building that can be driven by people with the dyslexic ability. That is simply not happening. And we need to win this. Any initiative, any drive, anything that can create more of the awareness, push more of the agenda, it's a righteous battle that we really, really need to make happen. I'm being very selfish here. It's not about, I'm not even talking about the advantage to those who have dyslexia. I'm talking about the value from them. And it's too much to just let go, just like that, for no reasons. It's a waste, in my own opinion. But we can't let it continue like this for much longer. It's crazy. That's my own opinion.
Absolutely, I agree with you. It's a battle we have to win. And I think for many, even that idea that it's a battle feels like it's a long, drawn journey, but it is a journey that is worth it. Donna, would you like to add anything before we go?
I suppose I'd just come back to this idea, building on what's just been said, that this is not a niche subject. I think there's about 1 in 5 of us who are neurodivergent. I know Chris maybe doesn't like that phrase, but this is not a niche issue. This is something, it comes down to almost a human rights issue, doesn't it? At a level of discrimination and so on, and a whole community of human beings who are being disenfranchised by society. I suppose just to add on to that, it's an interesting comment that's been said about the words we use. I feel that until the discrimination and misunderstandings removed, which is, I suppose, the foundation that the words are built on, we can pick whatever words we like and they will still end up discriminating and being misunderstood for the people those labels are attached with. I think the labels are a message that things are not quite right yet. So it's about challenging the emotion and the energy and so on that's around it, where those words evolve from, rather than just a cosmetic change of let's change the words and then everything will be okay, because it won't be. So yeah, I think it's really fascinating. So thanks so much for having me along. I've learned a lot and I've made some notes while the experts have been chatting as well.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And again, that thing about we have to be true to the cause and we have to be committed to making the actual change, not just a brushstroke, changing the terminology. Very important there. Tunji Andrews, anything you'd like to add before we go?
I'm just realizing that I took for granted that I'm dyslexic and I can see other dyslexic people in operations, and I've been able to take advantage of that in my organization. I think this is a call really for greater training with more businesses to be able to understand how to take advantage, because it's like you have superheroes in your business and you just don't know. It's like they are really walking in the midst of you and you're not taking advantage of the fact that you have superheroes there. And unfortunately, if you are not trained properly, you would never really be able to spot them. I can spot it because I'm one of them, so I'm able to spot another one down the road. So I think this is a call for more businesses to, get better trained, better to better understand why people like this are supposed to be very useful in the growth of your business, especially in the areas of innovation, growth, large thinking, design thinking, and things like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Thank you all, everyone. I learned so much. I would love for us to continue the conversation. I'm sure we will. Thank you for everyone who listened and who shared questions that informed our conversation. Mr. Bernard, handing over to you now.